is indeed a very complex topic. There isn't even agreement on just what religion is. In the West, religion is often defined as various beliefs in a deity, a god, and it includes various articles of faith and rituals that accompany the religion. Most of us are familiar with this. This definition does fit the Western religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but it's frankly a very limited definition, and it's not particularly accurate because there are literally thousands of other religions that offer different explanations of what religion is. While Judaism, Christianity, and Islam believe in the same supreme deity, they call it by different names: Yahweh, God, and Allah. But it's the same God. A lot of Americans don't realize Islam is very close to Judaism, and it borrows from Christianity. Other religions believe in many gods, and some religions are atheistic, meaning they don't believe in a supreme being, at least not one defined in the Western religions. I think a broader view of religion is really necessary, so I define religion as a system of beliefs that define the world around a person and a culture. It's a system that deals with broader questions of human existence. How did this world come about? Why did it come about? Why am I here? How am I supposed to relate to the world? What are my responsibilities as a human being? How do I live my life? And all religions include many customs and rituals that are designed to connect their followers to the beliefs of the religion and to answer at least some of these questions. Religions most often have sacred spaces and sacred places, such as a church, a temple, a mosque, or a special mountain, a river, a forest, or a pilgrimage site. And some religions have some or all of these. To answer the many questions of our existence, religions usually have sacred scriptures as well, and these can be oral or written. We don't really know, per se, when religion started, but there is archaeological evidence of religious practices among human beings many tens of thousands of years ago. And I submit that religion is embedded in our human nature, and I think it's hardwired into us, at least most of us. We are an inquisitive species, and this is the root of religion. I think religion is actually a need in human beings. No matter what culture, no matter what group of people, asking ultimate questions is very important, and so too is the need and practice of ritual. Humans love rituals. Think about it. Rituals are certainly not related or not limited to religions. Just about every transition in human life is augmented by a ritual. Yes, this does include religious rituals, but there's so many other rituals as well. Birthday parties, school graduations, national celebrations such as July 4th and Thanksgiving, President's Day and Memorial Day, and there are many, many more. And it seems society is always creating new rituals. Who ever heard years ago of a gender reveal party or a naming party? Human beings create our own rituals in the form of habits, such as what we do each time of the day during the week and on weekends, what we do in our spare time, how we interact with friends and family, and more. The point is, rituals are hardly limited to religion. As I mentioned, religion also creates rules and ethics on how a person should live their life, what's considered right and wrong. Religions create boundaries on what is acceptable human behavior. To be sure, purely secular societies create similar boundaries, but not in the same way. If a person breaks the law, there are criminal penalties, which include fines and imprisonment. If religious boundaries are broken, there's generally greater consequences for a person that may be otherworldly. We live in an unusual time in human history where religion is actually on the decline in many parts of the world, including the United States. The Pew Research Center, which studies religions, details that in the mid-1970s, over 90% of Americans considered themselves Christian. In the next 50 years, this number will drop below 50%. This is an entirely new phenomenon, and the reasons are numerous, varied, and complex. They range from intellectual conflicts with religious dogma to changes in family life, from affluence to religious diversity, from abuse by religious leaders to the rise of social media, which acts as a substitute for in-person interaction. Not a good one in my view either. So this is concerning. And I think it's profoundly so, and this despite the fact I believe I'm more spiritual than a religious person, but I'll get to that in a minute. I recently had to think about this a lot. Many of you know I teach at Nichols College in Dudley, Massachusetts. During the fall semester, I teach leadership, which is a required course for freshmen. In the spring, I teach world religions. In my world religions classes at the beginning of the semester, I ask my students to actually write something down to tell me what religion they are, do they practice their religion, and how important is it to them. Except for less than a handful of students, nearly all my students tell me they only have a vague understanding of their claimed religion, they do not practice it, and it is not important to them. This seems to be in keeping with the Pew Research Center's findings that religion is becoming less important in America. In my leadership class a few weeks ago, we were studying ethics in leadership, which I think is important. I gave a case study to my students which stated, you're in a very tough math class, and you're failing. You've had 2 midterm exams, you're failing. You know that if you pass the exam, you'll pass the course. That's what the instructor said. When you come back to your dorm room after dinner, you see the final exam, dated tomorrow, sitting on your desk. You know the exam has been stolen. What do you do? That was a case study with my students. I have about 62 students in my 2 classes. Except for one student out of the 62, every other student said they would use the stolen exam as a study guide. I was frankly nearly speechless when I heard this. Is there a connection between their lack of ethical awareness on this issue and their lack of religion? Or is it a change in family values and society's values? Or is it both? I'm not sure, but I do think a lack of religion is a factor. And in today's world, even supposedly deeply conservative evangelical Christians excuse unethical behavior in others, often with expressions such as, nobody's perfect or we're all sinners. This was not the case just a few decades ago. Far from being rather agnostic about religion and failing to embrace a religion, there's also people who take an active stand to denigrate religion, to try to convince people that religion is just a mind game played by people who are trying to control you. You may have heard the ads on the radio from Ronald Reagan Jr., a man who grew up as a Presbyterian Christian, but who now leads the, quote, Freedom from Religion Foundation. In these ads, Reagan declares himself an unabashed atheist who's not afraid of burning in hell. In his own words, Reagan states, and I quote, religions may persist, but they come and go. Where are the old Norse gods today? Where are the worshippers of Amun-Ra? 1,000 years from now, what will people make of a man tortured on a cross, or a prophet who was said to ride a white horse up to a mythical heaven, which was Muhammad? Faith will fade, religions will flower and vanish, but reason remains. Reason is where I put my faith. Reason is where I stand, and I'm happy to stand with you, unquote. To be sure, I have my issues with organized religion. This is why I'm a Unitarian Universalist. I've spent my life studying the major religions of the world. And without exception, I find them all to be human-made. That said, I think Ronald Reagan is overly myopic. For starters, Reagan seems to be mostly fixated on the God religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. He mentions pagan religions, which for the most part have disappeared around the world except in some rather primal societies. And he states that reason is where he stands. The problem with this line of thinking is that Reagan indirectly suggests that human reason is capable of explaining all things, and this is simply not true. The universe is vastly more complex than people realize. Reason can certainly help humans explain a lot, but not all of it. Suggesting that reason is a solution for all understanding is, to put it bluntly, arrogant. I'm also concerned that critics of religion usually focus on outdated or irrational beliefs, but fail to acknowledge that there's also good in religions, for religions can establish ways of living one's life that provide a society with the codes of ethics that benefit the entire society. Sabine Hossenfelder is a German quantum physicist. She's not a religious person, and she identifies herself as an agnostic. She is, to be sure, an iconoclast in her field. That is, she takes exception with other physicists who think human beings can figure everything out through reason and rationalism and logic. In her book, Existential Physics, she writes, and I quote, "While I find it comforting to think that reality can be explained merely through mathematics and by default human reason, I can't actually get myself to believe it. It strikes me as presumptuous to think that humans have already discovered the language in which nature speaks. Who's to say there isn't a better way to understand our universe other than mathematics, one that may take us 1,000,000 years to figure out, if ever? Just because we don't know a better way to describe natural phenomenon other than mathematics doesn't mean there isn't one," unquote. What we understand to be reason and rationalism for Dr. Hossenfelder have their limits. And as for God, she notes the existence of God cannot be proven, but so too God cannot be disproven either, and science will never be able to do either one. In my view, some scientists have created a new religion, complete with its dogmas, its sacred scriptures, its rituals, and its sacred spaces. So where are we to turn if we have trouble accepting the beliefs and practices of organized religions? I think the answer is we can reach for the spiritual, that which can lie within a religion, but so often lies beyond a religion. So what about spirituality? What is it? In a broad sense, I think spirituality includes components of religion, but it's much more. Spirituality is beyond religious rituals, religious beliefs, religious dogmas. Spirituality seeks a connection with other, and that other is defined in so many ways, sometimes by a religion, but sometimes by ourselves. This connection is deeply personal. It's emotional. It's awe-inspiring. It's uplifting. It's transformational. It can give us profound insights on our world and our place in the world. Spiritual moments can be transcending, and they can take us beyond the mundane of the day-to-day world. Spirituality is a recognition that there is a power in the universe that is greater than ourselves, and spirituality can be an attempt to connect or feel a part of that power. For the individual, spirituality can be a search for ultimate or sacred meaning and for purpose in life. Additionally, it can mean seeking out and searching for personal growth, establishing guidance for how we should live our lives. Spirituality is also a way to obtain inner peace and calm. Can religious people be spiritual? Absolutely, but many are not. Some religious people go through their day-to-day life practicing the rituals of the religion, but never venturing into the realms of deep spiritual thinking and spiritual practice, which is also defined in so many very different ways. Some criticize others for not being religious, yet they themselves ignore the spiritual aspects of their own religion. I've spoken before that people have three dimensions or components to our being: our body, our minds, and our spiritual side. These are generally not equal in people, and they can change as we pass through the stages of our life. But I submit that for each of us to be truly happy, we must acknowledge and engage all three components in our being and ensure there is a balance between body, mind, and spirit. When one component is ignored, it will affect our health and our happiness. As the Buddha said, just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life. Sometimes people are confused as to exactly what spirituality is. For these people, it's a foreign term, and this can be true for both religious and non-religious people. I'm often asked, just what is spirituality? It's hard to define exactly, so let me offer you three examples of people who have had a spiritual experience and finally begin to understand what it is. These three examples are true stories. Henry was a simple man. He'd grown up in a very conservative evangelical Christian family where as a child and a young person he was expected to go to church every Sunday, to a prayer meeting on Wednesday, and Bible study on Thursdays. As Henry grew into adulthood, he soured on his religious background. He began to see hypocrisy in so many people who attended his church. They professed supposedly Christian values, but were forever looking down on others. He learned of some in his congregation who even bragged about cheating in business, and he was particularly upset when a group of women and men in his church began an organized protest against some minorities who were moving into their town. Seeing all of this, Henry stopped going to church because he figured all other churches must be just like this. It's not that he no longer believed in God, but some of what he heard in church made no sense, so he focused just on living his life without religion. One day, Henry was walking in the woods on a nature trail outside of his town. He was walking on his favorite trail, and he went to his favorite spot, which was by a tall waterfall surrounded by a lush and dense forest canopy. As he sat observing and listening to the waterfall, something happened. All of a sudden, he became enveloped in all that he saw and felt. The waterfall became louder and took on a haunting sound like music. Rays of sunshine glistened from the spray of the waterfall and fell on leaves of the nearby trees. The sky above peeked through the trees, and a rainbow formed around the waterfall. Henry was transfixed. He felt the breath leave his body, and for one brief moment, he saw with clarity the oneness and sacredness of the earth, of life, and his place within it. For the first time, Henry had had a spiritual experience, and it happened because he chose to spend time alone in his favorite spot. Keegan was taking several weeks to drive across country, and he mostly took so-called blue highways. That is, he kept off the interstates and only used state roads and back roads so he could really see the passing countryside. Keegan had a friend who told him to visit the Navajo Hopi Reservation in Arizona and see the marvels of Canyon de Chelly, which is a national park, although few people visit it because it's on Navajo land. When Keegan arrived in Arizona on the reservation, he stayed overnight in the Indian village of Tuba City. The next day, he drove towards the canyon. At one point, he felt he was there, and he pulled off to the side of the road. And indeed, the canyon was a short walk from his car. He noted that the canyon was a smaller Grand Canyon with all the beautiful desert colors, a lush green valley, and a dry riverbed meandering through the canyon. But the most striking feature was a massive cliff dwelling built by the Anasazi 1,000 years ago. It took Keegan over an hour to get down into the canyon, into the cliff dwelling. There were no people anywhere. He sat on a flat rock to take it all in. All of a sudden, a strong wind whistled through the canyon, and in the wind were female voices. No words, just melodious female voices. With the natural setting of the canyon, the ancient cliff dwelling just behind him, the singing voices, Keegan was overwhelmed. An overpowering feeling of seeing the past, living in the present, and envisioning the future swept over him. Keegan had a feeling that he and the universe were one. It was truly a spiritual experience. Lisa was not a religious person. In fact, she believed religion was only a crutch for weak people to rely on. She scoffed whenever someone encouraged her to look for something more in life than just the material and physical. Anything you can't see or touch and rationally explain is just nonsense, she would say. Lisa also found herself a bit selfish, and this didn't bother her at all. One day, Lisa was driving to work. She was late, so she was driving fast and not paying attention to the traffic. She saw the light turn yellow, but she decided to run it as it turned red. She didn't see that a large truck had already entered the intersection, and she ran right into it. The next thing Lisa knew, she saw herself in an operating room in a hospital. She saw her body below, and she saw the doctors and nurses working on her. She saw what they were doing. Slowly, the scene disappeared, and she found herself flying effortlessly through a beautiful tunnel, alight with magnificent colors and peaceful sounds. Toward the end of the tunnel was a feeling of pure love, of pure acceptance, of pure joy. A thought entered her head. It's not your time. You must go back. She didn't want to go back. She wanted to stay. But the next thing she knew, Lisa was in her body, in a bed, in a hospital room. A nurse came to her. "Hello, my sweet," she said. "You've been in a coma for several days, but now you're back, and the doctors feel you will be okay after some weeks recovering." Lisa didn't know what to say or think. She remembered the details of what had happened to her very clearly. The doctors were mystified when she described in vivid detail what they had been doing to her in the operating room. Lisa also remembered the tunnel, the beauty, and the feelings of love and peace and joy. This changed her life forever. She would never be the same person. Instead, life took on a new meaning and a new purpose. She would never take it for granted again. And as for religion, maybe it has a purpose, she thought. But then again, I think I now understand what a spiritual experience is. These three cases are just some of the limitless number of spiritual experiences. Anyone and everyone can have them. They are epiphanies, manifestations, glimpses and perceptions of the true nature of existence and the meaning and purpose of life. Every person can have them if they only stop and think and take time with themselves in a favorite place. I'm not saying this is easy. It takes time. It takes practice. It takes an open mind and an open heart and a commitment to reach beyond ourselves, to strive to look at beyond what we know and understand, to take that walk beyond forever. As the French philosopher and Jesuit priest Pierre Teilhard de Chardin once said, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." Peace be with you. Please join in our closing hymn, number 208.